Good morning. First of all, my name is Francis Daniels, and I've held everybody up, for which I'm very sorry. It's an honor to have all of you here, and we are very grateful to the Royal Academy for being our host. What I'd like to do without further ado is to have the Permanent Secretary address us, Monsieur Abdeljalil.
الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على مولانا رسول الله. السيد رئيس معهد مانديلا للدراسات من أجل التنمية، حضرات السيدات والسادة، أيها الضيوف الكرام، يطيب لي أن أعبر لكم عن عميق سعادتي وأنا أفتتح باسم أكاديمية المملكة المغربية هذا الملتقى الخاص بالحوار رفيع المستوى بين شركاء معهد مانديلا للدراسات من أجل التنمية. وإذ أرحب بكم جميعا، أشير منذ البداية أن هذا الملتقى ليس فقط حلقة في سلسلة الترابط المتين الذي يجمع المملكة المغربية بكافة الأشقاء الأفارقة، بقدر ما هو أيضا يكرس تكريس للسياسة التي خطها راعي الأكاديمية جلالة الملك محمد السادس، والمتمثلة في إطلاق دينامية جديدة لهذا الترابط تشمل كافة المجالات وكل مناطق إفريقيا، متخذة لذلك بعدا قاريا. حضرات السيدات والسادة، إن أشكال التعاون التقليدية باتت متجاوزة، مما يدفعنا للبحث عن كافة الفرص المواتية لاستثمار ثرواتنا ومؤهلاتنا لخدمة المصالح الاستراتيجية لشعوبنا الإفريقية. ولن يتأتى لنا ذلك إلا في ظل تعاون تضامني جنوب متعدد الأبعاد والمسارات، وهو ما أكدته الخطب الملكية السامية لجلالة الملك نصره الله في العديد من القمم والملتقيات، حين أكد جلالته على أن إفريقيا ينبغي أن تضع ثقتها في إفريقيا، لأنها ليست في حاجة للمساعدات بقدر ما تحتاج لشراكات ذات نفع متبادل ولمشاريع للتنمية البشرية. من هذا المنطلق بادرت أكاديمية المملكة المغربية إلى الانخراط في برنامج المنح الدراسية لمعهد مانديلا الخاص بتكوين القيادات الإفريقية، لقناعتنا بالمنافع الأكيدة لهذا المشروع على المدين المتوسط والبعيد. وإذا ما أمعنتم النظر معي في فحوى هذا البرنامج، فسيتبين لكم أنه استمرار مؤكد في العنصر البشري الذي يعتبر بدوره أساس كل تنمية أو خلق للثروات، بل إنه يشكل الآلية التي ستمكننا من الإسهام في تكوين النخب الإفريقية عالية مستوى وصاحبة القرار في المستقبل، ناهيك عما يعكسه هذا البرنامج من تضامن ومصدر للفخر والاعتزاز لدى الشركاء المنخرطين فيه. إننا نتطلع من خلال اجتماعكم هذا إلى نقاش عميق تتمخض عنه مجموعة من التوصيات بمثابة خارطة طريق نتبناها جميعا. وفي الختام أتمنى لكم مقاما طيبا في بلدنا، آملا أن يحالف أعمالكم التوفيق. والسلام عليكم وسلام الله.
Thank you very much, Mr. Abdeljalil, for the gracious introduction. What we would like to do now is to move to the next stage of the proceedings. And the next stage is really one in which all of the participants should introduce themselves. Just say a little bit about about themselves, the institutions they represent. I suppose it would be best for me to start, and then what we could do is proceed leftwards. My name is Francis Daniels. I'm a fund manager investing across Africa, but I'm here really as an member of the advisory board of Minds.
I'm from Namibia. I'm a Yali Magna Fellowship fellow as well as a Minds alumni. I'm here speaking from my NGO, which is focused on closing the gap between high school and university for disadvantaged children. So,
Mike, please.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Tato Muchoni. I'm a Minds alumni. I'm also a Mandela Washington Fellow. I am an African living in Lesotho.
Good morning. My name is Rachel Nerazo Adams. I'm the founder of Narachi Leadership, and my focus is providing leadership tools to African leaders, both in the emerging space and in the existing leadership space. And my mission is to end the crisis of leadership on the continent.
Hello everyone, my name is Khalid Baradi. I am at the OCP Policy Center in Morocco, which is a Moroccan think tank aiming to bridge the gap between policy making and academia, and which has a focus especially on the South and South-South relationships. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I am Rumbi Zai Chisenga. I'm with Minds. I look after the youth program and the scholarship program.
Bonjour, je suis Amado Kabouré. Je représente l'ONG suisse NORAG, qui est spécialisée dans les politiques d'éducation et de formation internationale. Je représente cette ONG pour le compte de l'Afrique de l'Ouest francophone. Et je suis aussi chercheur au Centre national de recherche scientifique et technologique au Burkina Faso.
Good morning, everyone. I am Nordin Touhami. I'm Director of Cooperation and Partnership at the Ministry of Higher Education, Morocco.
Morning. My name is Liesbet Peeters. I am a partner at Dalberg, a global consulting firm, and I focus on impact advisory for financing. One of our specialty areas is education.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Richard Masemola. I'm the co-founder of Teach South Africa, an NGO that focuses in human capital development, wherein we recruit university graduates in the area of mathematics, science, English, and IT to teach in disadvantaged schools across the country in the very poor schools where mathematics continues to be a challenge for our country. I thank you.
Good morning to all of you, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Professor Rubina Jawaye. I'm the Pro-Vice Chancellor of the University of Mauritius. I've come here to extend the collaboration of the University of Mauritius towards the activities of mine, and more specifically in the context of scholarships that could be given to African students. And I'm here to represent the interests of the university and to foster all the activities of mine. Thank you.
السلام عليكم، صباح الخير. أستاذ إدريس منصوري، رئيس جامعة الحسن الثاني بالدار البيضاء، جامعة بها أكثر من 1200 طالب إفريقي من مختلف أنحاء إفريقيا، وأنا هنا لكي أوطد العلاقة مع معهد مانديلا من أجل الأبحاث والدراسات والتعاون. شكرا.
Good morning. I am Professor Sisko Makakula, Vice Chancellor, University of Swaziland. I'm here to explore further collaboration regarding the issue of scholarship and how we can build our youth in the African context. Thank you.
Good morning. I am Vusi Kumede. I'm a professor at the University of South Africa. I'm also director of the Thabo Mbeki African Leadership Institute. We focus on thought leadership for Africa's renewal. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Nana Wachiku. I'm here representing Nova Pioneer Academies. We're a network of schools in the African continent, focusing on developing the next wave of leaders and innovators on the continent. We currently have schools in Johannesburg and in Kenya, in Nairobi, and we hope to scale to reach all of the continent within the next 10 years.
Good morning. Nkosana Moyo, the founder and executive chair of Minds.
Good morning. I'm Professor Murapa from Zimbabwe, but based in South Africa. I am a former Vice Chancellor of Africa University, a continent-wide university, and set up the Institute of Peace, Leadership and Governance at the university. I'm a former World Bank and United Nations official. Thank you.
I am Rahma Burkhia. I am directing an institution within the High Council for Education, Training and Research, doing the assessment of the whole educational system, primary, secondary and higher education research. I am also a member of the academy, and I used to be in another life president of the university. Thank you.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Idowu Olayinka, Vice Chancellor, University of Ibadan, which is Nigeria's oldest university. For some time now, I've been involved with higher education management, leadership, as well as policy issues. So it's a pleasure for me to be in Rabat, Morocco. Thank you.
Bonjour tout le monde. Professeur Mohamed Essaouri, ancien président d'université et collaborateur du secrétaire perpétuel de l'Académie du Royaume du Maroc.
Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Vivian Chaplin, and I'm representing Edward Nathan Sonnenberg's Africa, which is the largest law firm in Africa with offices throughout the continent. I'm a director at the firm, and I specialize in mergers and acquisitions and corporate law with a focus also on developmental and non-profit organizations. We've been assisting Minds with the legal framework for the scholarship program.
Good morning, everybody. I am Professor Mohammed Abu Salah, and I'm the Secretary General of the Ministry of Higher Education and Scientific Research, Morocco.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Nisrine Wazani from OCP Policy Center. I'm a program officer for its Young Professionals Network. We offer various leadership and networking initiatives for young leaders. We have almost 200 emerging leaders from across the Atlantic Basin, and I'll be glad to chat to you about it. Thank you.
Morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm Chipo Moyo, and I'm accompanying Nkosana.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Abdellatif Sharafi. I'm the head of Africa Business School at University Mohammed VI Polytechnic in Morocco.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Nelly Swafente. I am the co-founder of a youth-led innovation company called Spring Age, which has been recently acquired by Deloitte, now called Spring Age by Deloitte. We bring together young people to come up with new ideas and insights for corporates on challenges that move our country forward. Thank you.
Morning, everyone. My name is Karine Seke. I'm from Minds, at the program officer at the Youth in Election and the Scholarship Program. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Ben Kamoun Mohammed. I'm Vice President of Polytechnic Mohammed VI University. This university is mainly focused on research tackling with the challenges of Morocco and Africa. Thank you.
I'm Professor Momba from the University of Zambia. I'm representing the Vice Chancellor of the University of Zambia.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Leslie Sedze from Minds, and I'm here to ensure that the program is a success. If you have any queries, you can come through and see me. Thank you.
Well, with that memorable end to the introductions, I'd like to invite Dr. Moyo to come to give us some remarks about Minds, the high-level dialogue, and the objectives of the program. Thank you.
Good morning. Now that all the introductions are over, we can get down to work, I hope. Firstly, let me thank you all for taking time to come and listen to what we're trying to do. And hopefully at the end of tomorrow, all of the people who've taken the trouble to come here will sign up to being the partners of this particular project, because I think it's a very interesting and yet very ambitious project. My role today, or this morning, is to try and conceptualize, put in context why it is we found it necessary, firstly, to form the organization, the Mandela Institute for Development Studies, and secondly, to contextualize the particular project which we are going to discuss in the next 2 days. Our starting point about 5 years ago was a rather painful acknowledgement as an African citizen that our continent continues to struggle with development in terms of the results for the effort that we put into it, if in fact we put any effort into it. And maybe just to put some comparative framework, about 60 years ago, when Ghana got its independence, a lot of people keep comparing it to Malaysia. At that point, Ghana and Malaysia, in terms of GDP and all of the measurements or matrices for development, were very similar. Today, Malaysia is virtually a first world country. And Ghana, not because it's Ghana, but Ghana representing our continent pretty well, and Francis is from Ghana. He can, if he chooses, take me to task on this. But Ghana representing the continent, not itself, is still languishing pretty well in the same place, if not worse, circumstances as where it was 60 years ago. Our view at Minds was that we, as Africans, need to look at ourselves in the mirror and ask a very basic question. What has gone wrong? And what worried us is that there is no evidence that we are doing this introspection. Firstly, that we recognize that where the continent is not a good place. And secondly, for us to go on a journey of discovery, if you will, to try to understand why we've ended up where we are. And lastly, to then ask the obvious follow-on question. If we're going to expect different results in the future, what is it that we must change and do differently? That is the framing. Having done that, I suppose we decided that we should create a space where we could meet as Africans and have a conversation, a dialogue about these issues. But we also decided to do one more thing, which is based on a hypothesis, if you like. We decided that meeting to dialogue on its own was not going to be enough. Minds as an organization chose to also engage in activities in 3 program areas. The first area was that of almost like self-understanding, what we call the African Heritage Project. Who are we? In our humble opinion, our perception is that we are a continent which appears to want to run everything about itself on the basis of mimicry. In other words, there is nothing original about most of the things we do. We try to be somebody else. Our belief is that it is not possible to progress when you're trying to be somebody else, because you can never succeed at being somebody else. And so we feel that there is a need for our continent to go back and reconnect with itself and to get comfortable and confident with who the peoples of this continent are, and use that as a foundation on which to move forward. That, by the way, does not mean we should not be outward looking, that we should not learn from other people, not at all. It simply means the foundation on which we stand can only be ourselves. Without that, there is no foundation. And without a foundation, there is nothing we're going to be able to build which is sustainable. So that's the first program area, African heritage. The second program area, I think, is best explained and illustrated in terms of the current global events. We recently saw the outcome of Brexit, the British referendum on whether to stay in Europe or come out of Europe. And more recently, we've seen a candidate who most people didn't think stood a chance of being elected as the president of the US, Donald Trump. He just won that race. And I think instead of being judgmental about these events and individuals, we need to dig a little bit deeper and understand what is at play. I'm sure that there are many things that are at play that we could identify. I want to focus on just one. A lot of people are not reaping the benefits of globalization, and they are making their voice felt in terms of saying, hold on, political elite and economic elites, you are not delivering for us, the majority of the global citizenry. It's working for you up there. As you can tell, the people in this room, myself included, we can travel where we want. We can invest our resources where we want. We've become global citizens. So globalization to some extent is working for us, the elites, both private sector and public sector. But I think globalization has in many respects failed the ordinary person. And the ordinary person is beginning to push back and say, this thing is not working for me. Why is this important for Africa? it's very important for Africa because I think we, for too long, have looked to the rest of the world to solve our problems. But I think the recent events are going to force the rest of the world to be much more inward-looking to solve their own problems. Now, how are we as Africans going to solve our problems? I think it's imperative, especially when it comes to the economy, for us to understand that each African country, if it were a company, would be subject for being taken over. Because most of our countries are not big enough to run sustainable, isolated economies. And we, again, me included, we use the label Africa very glibly. But Africa is 54 countries, and it's very balkanized. We do things in isolation. We try to do things at a nation-state-based level. But I think this is completely unsustainable. And I think we need to wake up in the context of the almost like rollback of some of the benefits of globalization and create scale for ourselves as Africans. We need to create more cohesion on the continent. We need to create more economic integration on the continent. Not political integration, it's not necessary. But economic integration is a must if we are to survive and be competitive on a global scale. So the second area of our attempt, if you like, to contribute to making a difference to our development effort as a continent is in the economic integration space. And we'll come back when I start talking about the project that we're here to discuss more explicitly. The last area is to do with young people. So even as late as last night, I was being challenged by some of the young people sitting in this room. And the young people tend to say to people like me, you've destroyed our continent. It's your fault. You've not delivered. And I've thought for quite some time, long and hard, and I've decided that actually we are where we are because of the young people's behavior. They are to blame. They blame us, but I think they are more to blame. And let me explain why they are more to blame. There is nothing that happens in society that is not majoritarian. Everything that goes on all over the world is decided by a majority. The majority can either choose to acquiesce with bad things that happen or choose to rebel and say, this is not acceptable. And no force in the world can stand against a majority. Now, we all know that the African continent is a young continent. 60% or thereabouts of Africans are under the age of 35. And as we project forward in terms of demographics, we know that that percentage is actually getting bigger rather than smaller. So once you understand that the young people are in the majority, I turn it around to you young people sitting in this room and say everything that's bad that's going on our continent is your fault because you choose to acquiesce. If you chose today to rebel, there is not a single African country that would withstand your rebellion, not one. But do you have to rebel? Rebellion can take many different forms. It can take a destructive form, or it can take a much more enlightened and guided way of creating a future that's different from where we are. And my view is that young people need to force themselves not just to react to what they do not want or do not like. Young people need to force themselves to conceptualize in very crystal form what it is they would like to see their countries and their continent become 10, 15, 20, 30 years from now. And once they do that, they can then contrast what that looks like with where we are today. And when you contrast those two places, where we are and where you want to go, you can then create the series of tasks that need to be performed to take you from here to there. And that is, in other words, what is called a job description for somebody. And once you've got that job description for what kind of person would be able to take you from here to there, every time you go to vote, you know who to vote for. You don't just vote because I'm this tribe or this gender or whatever. You begin to screen on the basis of what are the jobs that need to be performed to take me from here to there, and I look for the candidate who best meets those job descriptions, and that's who I vote for. And I've got the numbers on my side. So tell me, as young people, what would stop you? So from today on, those who are sitting in this room who are young, please don't look to me. Look to yourselves. You are responsible. The project that we are here to discuss today falls into the category of young people, and if you like, our contribution as the older generation in terms of what we can do to facilitate, to give you some of the instruments you need to create that future. In the next section, we're going to have Liesbet present some of the initial research that has been done. So I'm going to just touch on the concepts of what we're trying to do. I am a beneficiary of a scholarship that was given by the UK, and then I also got another opportunity to go to the US. And over time, I've sort of thought through why it is that in my case, these two countries chose to facilitate for me to go to their countries and experience how they organize themselves. And I've come up with one conclusion and one conclusion only. There could be others, but this is an important one. I think they are investing in creating a global network of people who are going to be friendly to them. That's what they're doing. And that's very rational. There's nothing wrong with that strategy. The question we have to ask ourselves as Africans is, what are we doing to invest in creating a network of Africans who will be friends to each other, who will be the cement, if you like, of creating the cohesion within Africa, between African countries? What have we done? Most of our children, because of the bad ways in which we run our continent, actually choose, if given a choice, would choose not to stay on the continent, but to go over there, because they see that as being more desirable. So it's not going to happen on its own. It's going to take a lot of effort on our part, a lot of investment, a lot of energy, a lot of imagination, to create investment types, this just being one of them, which will produce tools for our young leaders of tomorrow to have the foresight and the behavior patterns which create a cohesive continent. It just is not going to happen on its own. And so we came up with the idea that wouldn't it be a good contribution? That's all it can be. We don't pretend that it's a solution on its own. It's a contribution. If we came up with a facilitative measure to get young people to travel within the continent and experience living in countries other than their own, so they can make friends out there, they can find lovers out there, get married, settle down, and a lot of issues that are a problem today on our continent would disappear, not because people theorize about it, but because people live and experience being African. So this program or this project is about producing Pan-Africanists who live and breathe and experience being such, so that in future, how they live their lives, how they lead, is based on what they know, which is being a Pan-African. At the moment, we are being led by people who I think are very inward-looking, very parochial, and it is not feasible, given the kind of behaviors we have today, to create a cohesive continent. It's just not going to happen. But I think it's important for us to take on the responsibility. If we believe in an Africa that can do these things differently, each one of us in this room has to ask herself, himself, what am I personally going to do about it? It's not good enough to say, I see what should be done, and think that somebody else should do it. Everyone is sitting in this room. The question you should ask yourself is, what am I personally going to do to make that happen if I believe in it? Not somebody else. With those few comments, I would like to think that I've framed a bit. Maybe let me just end by telling you what our expectations are. So Liesbet will do a presentation of our initial research in terms of what efforts have been made by who, what is going on in terms of creating this experience of Africa by young people. We expect you not just to take it as given, but to push back and help us to enrich those findings. You are on the ground, you know what's going on. So let's hear from you what it is that's going on out there, what it is that you think could be done differently, better, but more important, or just as importantly, tell us what it is that's going to challenge us as we set out to implement this program. What could go wrong? And where you come from, are you prepared to partner us to make sure that you help us manage those things that could go wrong? So at the end of tomorrow, not only are we expecting to have kind of tested the concept, we expect to get a lot of rich feedback from yourselves, but also to get a lot of sign-ons, if you like, in terms of who is going to be a partner on this, I think, incredibly important effort to create a continent that can succeed on the basis of cohesion, Pan-Africanists, and economic integration. Thank you very much.
What I'd like to suggest before we go to the listen to the next speaker, if anybody with questions should feel free to pose them to Dr. Moyo before he takes a break. No questions?
It looks like it's what they call as clear as mud.
Okay. Let me ask you a question
But,
then.
okay, fine.
Yeah. How important is the experience of people depending on each other to develop the Pan-African idea you have through scholarships? Because it's arguable that in many cases, a sense of group feeling comes from actually people recognizing that they depend on each other. Is the program that you've outlined going to make much of a contribution in that direction?
I think the question you asked, Francis, is incredibly important. So where we're starting from, we would argue that unfortunately at the moment, Africans perceive not a dependence on each other, but a dependence on people from outside of the continent. And that's where we keep running to. We feel that we depend on them. We need things from them. And that also comes from a very deliberate investment from the other, in the sense of divide and rule. When you look at the balkanization of our continent, that was not an accident. It was done precisely to create linkages which were not within, but linkages which started from the continent to an outside point. But the point is, I think, a recognition that at the moment we do not have a sense of depending on each other, needing each other, is going to need an investment in making that become a reality. And hopefully we can demonstrate that very easily as we go through the next 2 days. We just have not been looking and not looking in the right places. But also, if I may put it rather provocatively, the forces against globalization that I talked about are going to cause the others that we thought we depended on and who we continue to look to kind of reject us. And I think we need to wake up before that becomes a very painful lesson and begin to develop the platform for ourselves of that interdependency and sort of support from each to each other within the African continent on which you can then build.
Good. There we go. A question from
you. Yes, so as I was saying, the issues around free movement of peoples cross-continent, that's a conversation that I think is important for us to close that gap, because I think it's very expensive, one, and two, very challenging for us to move across the continent, as it's actually much more cheaper and easier to move to Europe or to Asia, etc. And then two is around the issue of how do you change the conversation and the brand of Africa being a war-torn, poor, etc. country, that when another African national comes in to your country, that is not seen as a threat. Because I think currently that's the situation right now, at least from the experiences that I've had, that we don't necessarily trust the intentions of our other fellow African brothers and sisters when they come in, that they're almost a threat to our economy, a threat to our development. And that's more an attitude issue and a behavior issue, and how do we speak into that space? And how do you facilitate an environment that's able to break those barriers and those attitudes? Thank you.
You know, so let's go back again. Have you ever been here before? No, exactly. So every single event that we hold at Minds is held in a different country. We move our events around, not because it's easy. Actually, it's incredibly difficult for exactly the things you articulate. You know, getting a visa, connectivity in terms of flights, it's a nightmare. But we are doing it deliberately. Deliberately because we want to leave what we're saying about how we're going to create the future. Most of the time, we find that when we meet in a particular location, the people who come to the event, about 90% of the people who come to those events would not have been in that country before. So as we talk about Africans getting to know the continent, in everything we do, we are living up to that. We are creating the opportunity for Africans to move across the continent. That's point number one. Point number two, if young people are going to be leaders of tomorrow and lead in a different way, we want them to experience today the nonsense that our continent subjects its own citizens to. We don't want you to theorize about it. We want you to go through the hardships of getting that visa. We want you to go through the hardships of getting those flights and traveling 40 hours to go from one African country to another. We want you to know how nonsensical it is. Because if you're going to be a leader, you need to know what it is you want to manage and change. If you theorize from an armchair, you're not going to get there. So we are doing all of these things in the way we do them deliberately, so that you know. Having said that, you know, let me say something that is going to almost like contradict what I said before. Is the continent a total failure? Actually, surprisingly, the answer is to be, it's not a total failure for some people. For some people. By and large, the African public sector is living very well, thank you. They just don't care about their people, that's all. So they've got diplomatic passports. And so getting a visa to travel within the continent, when you go and describe what you've just been describing, they'll say, what world are you coming from? Because they don't recognize it. It doesn't happen to them. Yeah? So there is a class of Africans who have developed very successfully a functioning continent for themselves. But guess what? They've left everybody else behind. And we're saying, if most things are majoritarian, to some extent it's our fault, the majority, for letting them get away with it. We just need to go and say, no, this is not going to continue to happen this way. But for young people in particular, we are also saying to you, see what is not working today so that you don't run our continent the same way tomorrow. Go through it, live it, and experience it. And then you will know what you are managing rather than just theorize about it.
More questions? Good.
Thank you very much. My concern, Dr. Moyo, is when all is said and done, I rather fear, and I stand to be corrected, that as long as we continue with the same education that does not speak to the context of Africa, about the potential of Africa and the vision for Africa, and as long as we are running with the education that has been imposed on us, that doesn't even give us a platform or the ability to be job creators, but instead we get the paper qualifications, and young people are qualified out there and they still have to run and get jobs. People, and young people especially, will still see themselves running to Europe and other parts of the world because there is guarantee that they will find jobs. So this is a very lovely initiative, but I rather feel the issue of education for Africa, Pan-African education, has to be at the forefront, and I'm hoping this will come up in the discussions as we go on.
Again, you've just made a statement which I think is more historical than current in terms of you can always get jobs. That's actually not true. That's why we're getting the reactions that we're getting, Brexit, Donald Trump getting elected. But if you want to go to clean toilets just because you're in the States, you're welcome, and I'm sure you probably can get a job cleaning toilets. And I'm not so sure that young Africans, educated Africans, are going to continue to be satisfied with doing that, even if it were available. But maybe more fundamentally, you ask your question as if it's somebody else's responsibility. Remember what I said. If you think something is not working the way it should work, ask yourself what you personally are going to do about it. And get on and mobilize your friends and get it done. Get it changed. Things don't change on their own. Every single institution that you see today, everyone, whether it's religious, political, economic, or whatever, every single one was created from somebody's idea. So you've got a bright idea, see what you're going to do to make it happen. Don't blame somebody else. Mobilize and get it changed. That's what I'm trying to also make you walk away from here tomorrow understanding. It's your responsibility. I don't want to sing personal praises, but mine was started precisely because of that. That's what I figured needed to be done, and I went and did it. And I'm sure that I'm not exceptional. All of us, provided we understand this, the agency, that we're an agent of change in our own right. If we think something is worth doing, we might find our friends, persuade them, get the support, mobilize, and get it done. The world that you want is your responsibility to create. Second point, I often wonder whether Africans really understand human nature. Human nature has got two key dimensions which we need to be able to reconcile. We as human beings are capable of cooperating with each other, but it's inbuilt in us also to compete for survival. And I often use very day-to-day, sometimes almost like facetious kind of illustration. So you are sitting next to Rachel there, yeah? So can you remind me what your name is, young man? Yeah, so if the three of you were stranded on an island, you and Rachel would kill each other for that one man. That's just the nature of competition. You understand? So it's not something, it's not rocket science. So when we keep asking other people to do things for us, there's something wrong in our understanding of human nature. People fundamentally do things for themselves, and they will cooperate provided they can see that doing things that way will give them a bigger benefit. So don't go preaching for other people to do you good because they love you and so on and so on. It depends on that very delicate balance. Should they compete with you or should they cooperate with you? Which one is going to give them an advantage? And it's up to you to understand that.
There's an institution which provides an alternative, and that's polygamy for the three of them. And on that note, let us give a big round of applause to Dr. Moyo for his introduction. And I would like to now ask Ms. Liesbet Peeters to come and begin to sketch out for us the agency to which Dr. Moyo referred in this scholarship program. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. From a logistical point of view, we have prepared a few slides. We do not have them projected, but they are all in your packet. So if you wouldn't mind grabbing the packet that is titled the Mandela Institute for Development Studies Funding for African Students, Rabat Dialogue on the purple Dalberg paper. As Dr. Moyo was saying, we have been working with the Institute for the last few months, sketching out and benchmarking and taking examples and lessons from around the world to dig deeper into and build a data set and a fact set around cross-cultural education programs, scholarship programs, etc. We are in the middle of our work, so what you have in front of you is work in progress, and it is food for thought. As Dr. Moyo was saying, it's stage setting for a dialogue for the rest of the 2 days that we're going to spend together on this. I myself, I am a Flemish Belgian, born and raised in a small village, and I'm a beneficiary of a number of cross-cultural scholarships that have allowed me to open my frame of mind, my cultural enrichment, and actually that took me first to the UK, then to the US, very similar to a number of us, and through the US actually to the African continent. I was not born and raised there, but I've spent the last 13 years spending 80% of my time across Africa. Started originally in Abidjan, Francophone West Africa, all the way through to Southern Africa and East Africa. I probably know more about the African cultural and intercultural challenges than the current ones in Europe. And yet there is a number of amazing lessons that I draw from my own personal experience and looking at some of the examples of some of the cross-cultural programs that we originally set up 40, 50 years ago on the European continent, and the potential that a program like this can have here, here on the African continent. So with that, and without further ado, I would like to take you through our presentation of our initial findings. First and foremost, we've built up a reference base across a number of other programs, making the case for cross-cultural education. And then secondly, we've started putting some thoughts together in terms of what that could look like. So if you go to page number 3, one of the most successful cross-cultural programs that currently exist is a scholarship program called Erasmus. In Europe. It's across the European countries. It's been in place for a number of decades. At any given time, there is more than 4,000 students across Europe that benefit from going into universities and tertiary education programs in different countries. Again, I myself was one of those students about 20 years ago, and it was absolutely eye-opening. So it's one of the programs that I think is the big international benchmark. The 3 benefits that people have seen demonstrated time and again of this cross-boundary program within one given continent was, 1, a strong development of leadership skills across the students that participate. About more than 50% of those students actually increase their employability skills, coming back to the question around employment, versus education, but also enhance their global awareness, their multidisciplinary skills, and their cognitive skills and their soft skills. Secondly, it's been quoted and it's been demonstrated as one of the catalytic moments in a youngster's life to enhance their personal skills and their personal growth. It's a personal growth journey. It's the moment that oftentimes people refer to afterwards, thinking like that's where, I changed my mindset. That's where I changed my perspective. That's where I matured. That's where I gained my self-confidence. That's where I learned how to do my laundry, where I learned how to stand on my own 2 feet. But I also had that cultural experience of learning from other people and other cultures. As a data point, more than 40% of alumni who participated in the Erasmus program in Europe actually have moved to another country after their graduation or after their education, compared to students that haven't participated. And then lastly, there is a significant enhancement or advantage or competitive advantage on the job market. A little bit that survival versus cooperation. Participating in a program like this actually enhances your survival skills as well, and sort of like benefits you greatly when you come into the job market. More than 20%, like 23% lower unemployment rates across the cohort of students that have participated in these programs versus students that have not. Now, when we look at the African context, we see that the barriers of participating in a program like this and studying abroad are even higher than the barriers that already exist for pupils to participate in higher education. For higher education in general, affordability and access to finance to actually be able to go and study is one of the most important barriers often quoted. That is exactly the same for them wanting to go and study abroad. There is additional costs associated to it, so it makes the problem or the barrier worse, and there is higher competition. And like the availability of financing options is much more limited for going to study abroad, even more so. The access to information and awareness is even more limited for the availability of going to study abroad than it is for just entering from secondary education into tertiary education. There is very few students that are actually aware of the options, the opportunities, and they don't have the access to the information to actually attain any of those programs. And then lastly, there is almost no institutional support. Partnerships, exchangeability, transferability across any of the different countries, just does not exist. When we zoom in on the financing options on slide 5, and you map out what actually then happens, you see a very strong bias. And this is a unintended, uncorrelated bias, but a bias nonetheless, due to these barriers of students that are able, or people that are able to gain access to finance to go and study abroad vis-a-vis their household income levels. And it is the upper elite of the upper income classes that actually have access to programs that allow them to go and study abroad. Most of these are self-funded because there is such a lack of scholarship programs and funding options available. And most of the bursaries and the scholarships that do exist, again, favor the higher end of the university programs, and oftentimes, even though they're merit-based, but due to access and lack of information, they end up in the hands of the students that are favored towards having access to that information, i.e. the ones that actually have had access to certain private schooling in secondary classes, etc. And so they already know, and they already have like a step up, like in that regard. Moving on to slide 6. What we have looked at is we've tried to map out where the African students actually find themselves when they go and study abroad. First and foremost, and this is data taken from 2013, we're still putting together all the data that is more recent, but I think it's the largest data set that is out there and very relevant. Out of all the students that study abroad, so away from their own country of origin, only 11% actually originate from the African continent. And if you look at the distribution, like on slide 6, most of them actually come from developed countries. So 1, there is a lack of participation from developing countries, and 2, the participation of Africans studying abroad is extremely limited. Secondly, when we actually look at the distribution of those African students studying abroad and where they are studying, they're all going to the UK and the US. 2/3 of the African students studying abroad are currently studying or are studying in the UK or the US. And only 16%, if you add them up, are in sub-Saharan Africa and Northern Africa. And we'll come back to, you know, like some of the consequences of that and where that is, because at the end of the day, there is also a supply and demand, you know, like question embedded within that. So what have we set out to do? If you go to slide 8, we're currently working with the MINDS team to do 3 things. One, we're looking at the international benchmarks of global scholarship programs and regional scholarship programs. I already quoted the Erasmus program as one of the, you know, like big ones out there, and see what lessons we can draw from it. What lessons we can learn, but also how can this be relevant and contextualized in the African setting. So obviously, needless to say, these programs are always in flux. They need to be adopted, and they differ from the different contexts. Secondly, we're looking at the gap analysis between what is already existing and what is needed, and what the continent would need, and what can actually be additive vis-a-vis what already exists. And as you know, like thinking back to the few statistics that I just mentioned, there is not a lot there. So it is still a, you know, like very wide open space at this point in time. And then lastly, we're looking at the deeper elements of how you can go about setting up a cross-cultural scholarship program like this. What would this mean in terms of its implementation and its challenges? Where we find ourselves today is sort of like somewhere in between the second and the third point, which is why we would love to hear all of your feedback and all of your input and all of your questions as we go through. As I mentioned before, there is very limited data available on where we can already find programs that support students to go and study or undertake their studies across the African continent. We have started a database of all of the different initiatives, and so far the results where we have gotten to are on slides 9 and 10. We have found 13 programs giving about 1,000 scholarships per year that are focused on the African continent. Some of the largest ones are supported by the MasterCard Foundation and the Africa Leadership University. They target Africans wanting to study in Africa, and financing is, you know, like the big component of the program. We have mapped them out based on the country of origin of the student and the country of destination of the student on slide number 10, which gives you a very interesting yet incomplete picture of these programs. And as I mentioned, we would love to hear any programs we might have missed, any data, you know, like, because we are literally accumulating this as we speak because of the lack of information that is available. But a few initial findings. One is that the programs that exist are extremely skewed towards students within a certain region. And where people are studying is also extremely skewed, either in Southern Africa, and South Africa is one of the bigger ones. And then secondly, even if you look at the all bucket in some of the programs, for instance, ALU, and the one that is supported by Fondazione, they don't have a specific destination focus, but at the moment they only have one university. So ALU only exists in Mauritius, so the program is, you know, like relevant for people all over the continent going to study at the University of Mauritius, and the same for Fondazione, where it is eligible to all of the students from the continent, but it only supports the university in Ghana. So, you know, like even there, you already see, you know, like the bias coming through. Slide number 11. What have we learned from global programs elsewhere? Some of the key success factors, and this takes us into some of the implementation components and some of the lessons learned. One, the more successful programs in terms of providing scholarship support or funding support for students to go and travel outside of their country of origin to go and study are the ones that are focused on selecting them based on leadership, not on academic merit. Now, academic merit and academic performance is absolutely crucial. As you look at the selective enrollment criteria, they are a must-have criteria for eligibility, but selecting the student needs to happen at the leadership level, not at the academic level. Secondly, embed the program with mentorship and social awareness. And this is an interesting anecdote. I shared it with Dr. Moyo yesterday, and it reminded me as he was talking earlier. So when I had my scholarship to go to the US, it came not only with financial support, but with a social integration support. So we had a week induction course on what you need to know about America and American culture and American habits. And coming from Europe, it was sort of like, well, you know, it's not that different. But it was actually really important. And one of the ways that the program did that was appointing you a host family, where, you know, like you could go and you could have interactions with, and one of the things that the host families do is invite you for Thanksgiving. Now, Thanksgiving is an American holiday. It doesn't get celebrated in Europe. I'm a Roman Catholic raised Belgian. It is definitely not religiously, you know, like focused. And so, you know, like I had never heard of it. 15 years later, I just celebrated last Saturday Thanksgiving dinner in London with my friends who went to the same university as me in the US. We had no American at the table, yet we had a turkey and all of the American cornbread and cranberry sauce and sweet potatoes and all of that. And we were, myself a Belgian, an Austrian, Hungarian, a Greek, a Russian, and a Romanian person. Talking about cross-cultural, cross-boundary, social interactions and opening your mind to what can happen, you know, like 15 years down the line by all of us just being invited by our host families for Thanksgiving dinner 15 years earlier. So a very important component there. And I think those are the elements that really speak about that cohesion and that integration across. And then lastly, an element that also already came up is support of the program in job placement and employability. The Erasmus program, the scholarship programs elsewhere, they all have a job placement component. They all have an internship component. And most of those actually come from private sector involvement. And I'll come back to that in just a second. One of the final points that I would point out in terms of success factors is that what we have seen is a complete ability to be agnostic of academic disciplines. The Erasmus program is not based on what discipline you study. It does not matter whether it's business, political science, engineering, physics, or anything. It's across academic disciplines. And this has been one of the other key success factors. Some of the challenges that have existed is definitely one, the ability to have the program be complemented with a non-financial support program. So the mentorship that I mentioned, the host families, the side events, etc. It takes and it requires a lot of funding in order to be able to set those things up, and you need to create a strong network of being able to do that. Secondly, being able to create ties with the local and the national social programs for emergency funding or health insurance or travel insurance, some of the more like administrative things that already came up that are hugely important. And lastly, being able to maintain independence from the universities. So the programs that are the most successful are the ones where the scholarship program is in addition to the selection process and how the universities actually manage, one, their operations and two, their financing. But there is a very clear separation between, like what I would call state and church, like between the program and the universities. So with that, final parting thoughts on slide 12. Where do we see massive benefits for the private sector and the public sector across the African continent in getting involved in something like a Pan-African scholarship program? One, for the private sector, as I mentioned before, being able to create and support a pool of talent that is going to be not only well-educated, but also with a mindset and a perspective and cognitive skills that are absolutely crucial to be leaders on the continent, I think is absolutely key. Secondly, related to that, as I mentioned, a lot of these programs have built-in scholarship, internships, job placement programs, etc. We talked a little bit, or the question came up about education versus employment. A counterfactual that I have had, one, within the private sector clients that Dalberg serves, we often hear not the fact that there are no jobs on the African continent, but that the companies can't find the rightly skilled people to fill those jobs. And so I think the issue for Africa at the moment is more one of matching. And there is a mismatch between what people are educated in and the skills they have acquired and what jobs are out there. And again, a program that really ties those two together and brings in the employers and the private sector up front within those programs can be hugely powerful in that regard. And then secondly, anecdotally, as I mentioned before, I started working on the African continent 13 years ago. And out of my business school program, I was made an honorary member of the Africa Club because I was the only non-African in the Africa Club. And I was also the only member of that club who went to work on the African continent after graduation. All of my peers that were from Ghana, Nigeria, Kenya, South Africa chose to take jobs within the American multinationals post-graduation for various reasons and mostly for right reasons. But about 5 years afterwards, I started getting phone calls. Liesbet, we're looking to go back home. Can you help us? And it was the most inspiring phone calls. I was like, Kwame, you're from Ghana. What am I going to tell you where to go and find a job? But we were able to. And so that's again kind of like that power, of having that experience. Lastly, I think for both the private sector and the public sector, as I mentioned before, there is a real need to build up the supply of quality education service providers and universities on the continent. There is only 9% of students that want to go and pursue tertiary education that are able to do so. Given the fact that almost none of them have access to financing options to either go to the top universities or to go and study abroad, we need to build the universities and the tertiary service providers that are going to educate that 50% new generation of under 20-year-olds that are going to build the sub-Saharan African continent. And so both the private sector and the public sector, I think, by stimulating people to be able to go into programs will help build up the provision of quality education, but secondly, will also build cohesion across the education system. We spoke a little bit about visas and how difficult it is to travel across the African continent. I cannot imagine, wanting to hire somebody with a Senegalese degree in Tanzania at the moment, let alone harmonize, the diplomas and degrees that, within Europe. It's one of the things that the Erasmus program has done tremendously well over the last 2 decades, is to create a regional benchmark of degrees and diplomas across the 25 countries and to harmonize, and therefore actually instill a greater mobility of labor and the labor market. Because today, I no longer have to go through 2 or 3 months of hoops of administrative burden to show that my degree from Belgium, is valid in Spain or in Italy. So again, I think that's one of the massive, huge benefits there. And then lastly, I'm a technician, I'm a consultant, but I do believe that the ability to create cross-cultural awareness, people that have a better and greater understanding of different cultures and contexts, are more comfortable with ambiguity and flexibility, as well as a higher level of maturity and self-awareness, will ultimately lead to greater cohesion and higher leadership, and actually have more of the Africans step up and build the institutions and the companies that the continent so desperately needs. Thank you very much.